At first, he thought it was just the radio, a faint, rhythmic sound burying itself in the static of his headset. When you spend enough time in the dark, with a tactical helmet strapped to your skull, the electronics start to play tricks on you. You hear phantom pops. You hear wind interference. You hear the blood rushing through your own ears, amplified by the heavy ballistic shell trapping your head in its own micro-environment. But then, he heard it again, slow, heavy, guttural, breathing. And it wasn't his own, private. Lucas Hale stopped dead in his tracks. His boots ground to a halt against the broken asphalt of the forest road. Ahead of him, the patrol kept moving, stepping like ghosts through the darkness, entirely unaware that the man guarding their rear had frozen in place. The breathing came again. This time, it wasn't just in the background. It was intimate. It was close. It sounded as if someone had pressed their lips directly against the microphone inside. Lucas's helmet. Inhale, exhale, inhale, exhale. The hair on the back of Lucas's neck stood up. The temperature inside his combat suit felt like it plummeted by 10 degrees. He swallowed hard, his throat dry as dust, and pressed 2 fingers to his push-talk switch. He whispered, barely pushing the words past his lips. Anyone? Anyone else hearing that? The radio cracked. The squad leader, Sergeant Miller, answered immediately. His voice was sharp, professional, cutting through the static. Hearing what, Hale? Keep your spacing. Lucas felt a bead of sweat roll down his temple, tracing the edge of his earpiece. Breathing, Sergeant. Heavy breathing on the comms. There was a heavy, suffocating silence on the radio. 5 full seconds of dead air. Then, someone near the front of the formation, Carter, the heavy weapons specialist, let out a low, nervous laugh. Buddy, that's probably just you. Check your mic. Your mouth breathing again. Lucas desperately wanted to believe that. He wanted to believe that his microphone had just bent too close to his face. He wanted to believe it was a glitch in the encryption software. But as he stood there in the pitch-black night, he knew a terrifying truth. He was holding his breath, and the voice in his ear was still breathing. The squad had been moving for nearly 3 grueling hours. It was a standard night patrol. The wind was biting, tearing through the barren trees of the valley. The battlefield around them was a graveyard of concrete and twisted metal. They were sweeping an abandoned industrial zona, sprawling, decaying maze of old factories and warehouses. Sitting on the outskirts of a ruined city, most of the heavy fighting had moved miles away days ago. The artillery strikes had stopped. The skies were clear of jets. But Command, in their infinite wisdom, wanted this specific sector doubled. They had received fragmented reports of hidden enemy staging areas, so 10 soldiers walked slowly through the darkness, 10 men cut off from the rest of the world. Their night vision goggles bathed the ruined landscape in a harsh, glowing green light. To Lucas, looking through the optics, the world looked like a sickly, neon ghost town. Every burnt-out car looked like a crouching beast. Every blown-out window looked like a sniper's nest. They moved with practiced lethality. Weapons raised, spacing maintained, boots carefully avoiding shattered glass and loose debris. Lucas tried to shake the paranoia. He forced his legs to move, falling back into formation. He focused on the glowing infrared tape on the back of the helmet of the man in front of him. Just focus on the mission, he told himself. Keep your sector clear. But the breathing returned. It didn't fade and it snapped back into his headset, louder than before. Closer, inhale. exhale. It was the sound of a man exhausted, a man who was hurt. There was a wet, rattling sound deep in the lungs of whatever was making the noise. Lucas stopped again. His rifle trembled in his hands. He wanted to rip the helmet off his head, to throw the headset into the dark. But standard operating procedure strictly forbade breaking comes. "Hale," I said, "keep moving." Sergeant Miller's voice snapped over the radio. Laced with irritation, Lucas forced his boots to move. The patrol crossed a rusted chain-link fence and entered the heart of the old warehouse district. It was a nightmare of urban combat terrain. Rusting metal shipping doors, piles of industrial waste, overlapping shadows that even the night vision goggles couldn't fully penetrate. It was a place where 100 men could hide, and you wouldn't know until you stepped on them. Lucas glanced behind him, checking his 6 o'clock. Clear. He looked forward. The squad was intact. 10 soldiers, moving in a staggered column. And then, a terrifying thing happened. The breathing in his ear abruptly stopped. It wasn't a fade-out. It was a sharp, digital click, followed by absolute, crushing silence. Lucas let out a breath he didn't realize he was holding. A wave of relief washed over his exhausted muscles. It was just a glitch, he told himself. Just a rogue signal bouncing off the metal buildings. He enjoyed that relief for exactly 3 seconds. Then, Specialist Hayes spoke over the squad net. His voice wasn't professional. It was confused, and it was laced with a sudden, spiking panic. Sergeant, where the hell is Carter?" The entire squad stopped instantly. 10 men became 9. Everyone turned around, rifles coming up, scanning the dark. Lucas felt his stomach drop into a bottomless pit. Carter had been walking in the number 8 slot, right in front of Lucas. He was carrying a 40-pound automatic weapon. He was a big man. Now, he was gone. Asterisk, there had been no sound. No struggle. No shout of surprise. No sound of gear dropping to the pavement. No gunshots, just gone. Swallowed by the shadows of the industrial park. Sergeant Miller cursed viciously under his breath. The training took over immediately. Collapse the perimeter. 360 security, Miller barked. Hayes, ping Carter's GPS tracker. Everyone else, weapons hot. We check the immediate buildings. Flashlights clicked on, cutting blinding white cones through the oppressive darkness. The green glow of night vision was abandoned for the harsh reality of white light. They moved like a pack of wolves, checking every single blind spot in a 50-yard radius. They kicked open the rusting doors of a loading dock. They swept the interiors of a gutted office building. They shined lights behind massive, rusted dumpsters and up onto the fire escapes of the adjacent brick structures. "Carter. Report," Miller hissed into the radio. Static-tocked Hayes was staring frantically at his wrist-mounted tactical tablet. "Sergeant, his GPS is dead." The signal didn't fade out. It just vanished, like someone wrapped his beacon in lead. They searched for 20 minutes. Nothing. Not a footprint in the dust. Not a dropped magazine. Carter had vanished from the face of the earth. Lucas stood near the edge of an alleyway, his rifle trained on the darkness. He felt his heart pounding against his ribs like a trapped bird. Because right then, the radio clicked. Inhale. Exhale. Right inside his helmet. Lucas didn't use the push to. He kept his hands tightly gripped on his rifle. But he couldn't stop the words from spilling out of his mouth. "I'm hearing it again." This time, nobody laughed. Nobody told him to check his mic. 9 soldiers stood frozen in the dark, surrounded by towering concrete walls. Listening to Lucas's panicked voice crack over the channel. "Describe it," Miller ordered, his voice dangerously low. Lucas closed his eyes. "It's someone breathing. Slow, labored. It sounds like they're standing right behind me. Right over my shoulder." Miller paused. Lucas could hear the gears turning in the veteran squad leader's head. When Miller finally spoke, it was a question that made Lucas's blood run cold. "Hale, think carefully. When exactly did you first hear the breathing?" Lucas rewound the night in his head. The forest road. The static. The pause. About 5 minutes before we hit the warehouse district. About 5 minutes before Carter disappeared. The radio went dead silent. Nobody needed to say it out loud. Everyone understood the terrifying implication. The breathing wasn't a glitch. It was a countdown command refused to pull them out. When Miller radioed in the MIA report, command assumed Carter had fallen into an open hazard or deserted. Their orders remained identical. Complete the sweep of Sector 4. Proceed to extraction point Bravo. So. The squad continued moving. But they were no longer a patrol. They were prey. There were only 9 of them left. No one joked. No one complained about the cold. The silence between them was thick, suffocating, and terrifying. They moved shoulder, shoulder, a tight infantry knot. Rifles scanning every window, every rooftop, every shadow. 10 minutes passed. The breathing in Lucas's ear stopped again. He almost gasped in relief. The absence of the sound felt like a physical weight lifting off his chest. He looked at Miller, offering a slight nod. "It's gone." But 20 minutes later, as they moved down a narrow thoroughfare flanked by towering brick factories, the radio clicked. Inhale, exhale, inhale, exhale. It was faster this time. More desperate. "It's back," Lucas whispered, his voice trembling. "Sergeant, it's back." Miller didn't hesitate. Everyone tighten up. Interlocking fields of fire. Backs to the wall, now. The soldiers slammed their backs against the cold brick of the factory wall. They formed an impenetrable half-circle of Kevlar and steel. 9 rifles pointed outward into the dark street. Nothing could approach them without walking into a wall of lead. "Nobody moves," Miller growled. "Nobody breaks formation." Inside Lucas's helmet, the breathing grew louder. It sounded like the Phantom was hyperventilating. Then, the breathing stopped, and a split second later, a horrific scream tore through the night. This time, they saw it happen. Or rather, they saw the aftermath of it in real time. Sergeant Miller was standing directly in the center of the formation. He was looking left. In the blink of an eye, something violently jerked him backward. It was as if an invisible truck had slammed into him at 60 miles an hour. He was yanked off his feet, pulled backward into a pitch-black, narrow gap between 2 buildings that they hadn't even noticed. "Miller!" Hayes screamed. 3 soldiers rushed the alley instantly, their tactical lights flooding the gap with blinding illumination. But the alley was a dead end. It was bricked off, 20 feet in. There were no doors, no windows, no grates. It was completely empty. Just shadows. And a single, scuffed boot print in the dust. 2 men gone. No enemy contact. No gunfire. Just the breathing in the dark. The squad was teetering on the edge of a total psychological breakdown. 8 soldiers remained. Corporal Vance, the second in command, grabbed Lucas by the shoulder of his plate carrier and slammed him against a rusted truck. "You're the only one hearing this thing, Hale. What the hell is going on? Lucas pushed him back, his eyes wide with pure terror. I don't know, but the pattern is real. When the breathing starts, someone disappears. It's hunting us, Vance. Hayes, the electronic specialist, stepped between them. His hands were shaking, but his eyes were locked on his tactical tablet. Think about it, Hayes stammered. If whatever is doing this is using Hale's radio, then it's not magic. It's a transmission. It's local. Something is close enough to overpower our encrypted signal and pump that audio directly into Hale's headset. Lucas frowned, his mind struggling to process logic in the face of absolute horror. That doesn't make sense. Why just me? Why not the squad net? Because you're the rear guard, Hayes realized, his voice dropping to a whisper. It's isolating the straggler, but it's a radio wave. It's technology, and if it's technology, I can track it. Hayes dropped to one knee, ripping a specialized directional antenna from his assault pack. He jacked a cable directly from his tablet into the side of Lucas's helmet. Hale, the second you hear it again, you tap my shoulder. Don't speak, just tap. They waited. 5 excruciating minutes of silence. The wind howled through the broken glass of the factories above them. Then, a click. Inhale, exhale. Lucas slammed his hand down on Hayes' shoulder. Hayes' fingers flew across the digital keyboard. Lines of code and frequency waves bounced across the glowing green screen. Suddenly, Hayes stopped. He slowly looked up, tilting his head toward the pitch-black sky. I hear something, Hayes whispered. The squad froze. Over the sound of their own ragged breathing and the distant wind, a new sound emerged. A faint, high-pitched, mechanical whine. Lucas looked up. Through his night vision goggles, he saw it. 300 feet above them, drifting silently between the clouds and the jagged rooftops, was a small 4-rotor drone. It was painted matte black, completely invisible to the naked eye. Drone, Hayes said, his voice devoid of emotion. Inside Lucas's helmet, the breathing grew incredibly loud. Inhale, exhale. Hayes stared at the tablet, scanning the signal frequency pouring down from the drone. His face went pale. He looked at Lucas, his eyes filled with a horror far worse than ghosts. Hale, you're not going to believe this. Hayes bypassed the encryption and routed Lucas's audio feed directly into the tablet's external speaker. He wanted the whole squad to hear what Lucas was hearing. The sound of the heavy, wet breathing echoed through the dark alleyway. But then, Hayes pressed a button, removing a layer of audio filtering the drone was using to isolate the sound. Suddenly, new sounds bled into the track. It wasn't just breathing. It was chaos. A voice, panicked and screaming, burst from the speaker. Contact left. We're surrounded. Oh God, they're in the wire. The terrifying crack of AK-47 fire erupted in the recording. The deafening boom of a rocket-propelled grenade. The sounds of men screaming in agony. And underneath it all, that same heavy, wet breathing. Then, the recording cut to dead silence. Hayes slowly lowered the tablet. This isn't live breathing, Hale. It's a loop. An audio file. Lucas felt a chill run down his spine that froze him to his core. What do you mean? Hayes pointed a trembling finger at the drone hovering above them. That thing is broadcasting recorded battlefield audio. It isolated the mic feed of a dying man and pumped it into your headset. The truth hit Lucas like a physical blow. 4 days ago, another American patrol had gone missing in Sector 4. They had been sent to sweep this exact same industrial park. They never came back. The enemy hadn't just ambushed them. They had hacked their comms. They had recorded their final, terrifying moments. The breathing Lucas had been hearing for the last 3 hours. It wasn't a monster. It wasn't a ghost. It was the terrified, dying breaths of a soldier who had bled to death on this exact street days ago. The enemy drone had been replaying the audio repeatedly, beaming it directly into the headset of the last man in formation to terrorize them, to distract them, to break their focus. Vance, the acting squad leader, suddenly realized something much worse. "Wait," Vance said, his eyes scanning the dark windows above them. "If it's a recording, why did Carter and Miller disappear?" Hayes's eyes went wide. "It's not just recording. It's bait. It's distraction." They hadn't vanished into thin air. While the squad was hyper-focused on the rear, terrified of the ghost in Lucas's helmet, enemy snatch teams operating in total silence had been picking them off from the flanks. They used the terror to pull the squad's attention exactly where they wanted it. The drone was replaying the audio to lure them deeper into the maze, keeping them paranoid, keeping them stopping and starting in the open. Lucas looked down at his boots. Then he looked around at the towering brick walls, closing them in on all sides. They were standing in the exact center of a courtyard, a perfect 360-degree kill zone. Vance raised his rifle. "Ambush. Cover." He never finished the sentence. The rooftops erupted in muzzle flashes. Tracer rounds rained down from the sky, like a deadly, glowing downpour. The silence of the night was shattered by the deafening roar of PKM, machine guns, and incoming rocket fire. The trap had been sprung perfectly. Concrete exploded around them. The remaining 8 soldiers dove for whatever cover they could find: rusted cars, concrete pillars, piles of debris. Lucas hit the dirt, sliding behind the engine block of an old transport truck. Bullets sparked and pinged against the metal inches from his head. But this time, the squad wasn't fighting ghosts. And they weren't paralyzed by fear. The terror had been replaced by pure, adrenaline-fueled rage. Return fire. Suppress the high ground. Vance roared over the deafening noise. Lucas rolled out from behind the truck, putting his optic on a muzzle flash in a third-story window. He squeezed the trigger. 3 rounds punched through the glass. The muzzle flash stopped to his right. Their grenadier popped out from cover, aiming a 40mm launcher at a sniper nest on a crane. A second later, a brilliant orange explosion illuminated the skyline, sending debris raining down onto the street. The enemy had expected a terrified, disorganized squad, broken by psychological warfare. Instead, they got cornered apex predators fighting for their lives. For 10 agonizing minutes, the industrial park turned into a meat grinder of light and noise. Slowly, the volume of enemy fire began to slacken. The ambushers, realizing they had lost the element of surprise and were taking heavy casualties, began to break contact. Shadows retreated over the rooftops. The gunfire died down to sporadic, isolated pops, before finally fading back into the howling wind. The silence returned to the courtyard, but this time it smelled like cordite and pulverized concrete. The squad remained in cover, panting, checking their magazines, waiting for a second wave that never came. Hayes stepped out from behind a pillar. He raised his rifle, aiming straight up into the sky. He activated his infrared laser, painting the hovering black drone high above. He didn't use an optic. He just pointed and fired a single shot. the small machine shattered in midair. It spiraled downward, its rotors screaming as it plummeted out of the sky, before smashing into 1,000 pieces against the asphalt directly in front of Lucas. Inside Lucas's helmet, the static cracked one final time, and the breathing finally stopped, for good. The squad stood in a loose circle around the shattered remains of the drone. Their chests heaved. Their armor was chipped. Their ears were ringing from the firefight they had survived. But the cost was devastating. 3 soldiers, Carter, Miller, and a third man who fell during the final firefight, were gone. Lucas reached up with trembling hands and unclasped his chin strap. He slowly pulled the heavy ballistic helmet off his head, letting the cold night air hit his sweat-soaked hair. He dropped the helmet to the ground. For hours, he had listened to the desperate, terrifying breathing of a dead man, a soldier whose final, agonizing moments had been weaponized, turned into a digital ghost used to hunt his own brothers. War created many terrible things. Artillery that could level cities, chemicals that could burn the lungs. But standing there in the ruins, Lucas learned something infinitely more disturbing. Sometimes, the enemy doesn't need to hunt you down. They don't need to outgun you. Sometimes, they just replay the last mistake someone else made. They broadcast the terror of the dead, and they simply wait for you to walk into the exact same trap. If you enjoyed this deep dive into military suspense, and you want more long-form, intense battlefield stories exploring the psychological horrors of warfare, please hit that like button and subscribe to our channel. What would you do if you started hearing someone else breathing inside your helmet? Let me know in the comments below, because sometimes the scariest sound on the battlefield isn't gunfire. It's breathing that isn't yours.